May I request Mr. Prakash Iyer to address the gathering.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krishnan, and good morning to everybody over here. Can you hear me at the back? Okay. I'm delighted to be here, and it's good to see so many of you over here at what is clearly an important meeting, the National Productivity Summit. So, it's going to be a couple of days where we'll talk all about enhancing productivity, better asset utilization, how do we improve throughput. So I think it's interesting that in the middle of all of this, you've got someone who's going to try and talk to you about leadership and how you can unleash the leader within. So let me start by asking a question. How many of you in this audience are actually leaders? Okay, quite a few. So just to make sure I've got the count right, how many of you are not leaders? Can you put your hands up, please? Suddenly no one's putting his hand up now. Yeah, I think that's the simple point I want to make. Only some of you put your hand up in response to the question, how many of you here are leaders? And the truth is that each of us here is actually a leader. Some of us lead organizations, some of us lead teams, some people lead countries, some people lead armies, but the truth is, each of us here leads a life. Okay? And how good that life is will depend on the leader. So it's really not so much about saying what you can do to impact the whole world, as much as saying, hey, what can I do to impact my own life? And what I want to do really is, try and spend some time, maybe 30 minutes or so, on trying and sharing some thoughts with you on what it takes to be a better leader. And I love this quote from Albert Hubbard, who said, "One machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men." And I know that in a lot of the case studies that will come up after this, we will hear lots of examples of how we can actually improve on that. How can we become more productive? What are the ideas that you have to try and enhance productivity, enhance output, enhance throughput? But what I like about his quote is the second line, which says, "No machine can do the work of one extraordinary man." Okay, so while one machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men, no machine can do the work of one extraordinary man. And what I'm going to try and do is to say, how can each of us here become that extraordinary man? What are the things that we can do to actually become a better leader, to become a better person, and to actually get more out of this wonderful machine called, ourselves? And, to do that, I just thought I'll share with you the fact that a lot of what I'll share with you is really lessons that I've learned in my life. I was lucky. I went to work in organizations and worked with people where I think I learned a fair bit. And what I want to do is to perhaps share some of those lessons. And it's a lot of those lessons actually came together in a couple of the books that I wrote. And these are not rocket science. This is not, the theory of great human behavior. It's none of those things. It's really simple lessons that I think I learned. I saw it work with other people. I've often wondered, what is it about some people? What is it about some people that they have fantastic educational backgrounds, they work in great organizations, but they don't quite deliver to their full potential? And equally, you find some people who may not come from the best schools, who may not have had formal education like some of the other lucky people might have had, and yet they end up delivering a hell of a lot more. They surprise you. And I've often wondered, what is the difference? It's true with teams too. You'll sometimes find, lots of bright people get together, but the team output is not much. And equally, some very ordinary looking people come together and they create magic. What happens? What's the difference? And I think what I'm going to try and do is to share with you four stories, four lessons, as it were, which I'm hoping will kind of resonate with you and tell you maybe, just maybe, there's one of these lessons, one of these stories, which can actually turn the switch on in your head and tell you, I can become just a bit better than where I was today. And my hope for you is this, that you've been here today in the morning. If at the end of the next half an hour, you can take away even one lesson out of those four, if one of those sticks in your head, I'll say mission accomplished. So let me start with the first one. And I want to talk to you about an organization that's not so far from here. It's the Andhra Pradesh State Road Transport Corporation. Okay. They run a fleet of, I think, about 20,000 buses, one of the largest transport companies in Asia. And, as you might expect, they had a problem. Too many accidents. Okay. Not a day went by without the newspaper having one more story of a bus going off the road or, killing somebody or some people getting injured. And this was really bad news. And they thought to themselves, we must do something about it. And, as bright engineers and bright young people in the audience today, if you were to think about it, imagine now for a minute, you are a part of the Andhra Pradesh State Road Transport Corporation management, and you need to do something to cut down the rate of accidents. What would you do? You'd probably say, let's do a root cause analysis, and then, that'll be followed by a little more analysis, and then some root cause paralysis, perhaps. And then you might say, let's try and spend some time training the drivers. Let's try and tell them how to drive safe. They tried that, didn't work. Then you might say, the problem is not so much with the man, it's with the machine. Let's try and get engineering to take a look at the maintenance of the buses and make sure that the buses are in good shape. They tried that, spent a lot of money, didn't make a difference. Then somebody came into the bright idea and said, I know what to do. Just punish those guys. If they don't drive safe, let's penalize them. Let's take their money away. Let's take away their incentives. Maybe take them off the roster so they can't drive for a week. They'll lose money. Then they'll learn a lesson. They tried that. Didn't work. Then somebody said, maybe let's try the opposite. Let's reward them. Okay? Let's try and say that, if you drive safe and if you have, let's say, 3 months of no accidents, we'll reward you for good performance. Tried that. Didn't work. So they were really at a loss to say, what do we do to actually reduce the rate of accidents? They finally, after having tried all of this, they did something fairly simple. And within 6 months, the rate of accidents dropped from something like 0.13 per 100,000 kilometers to 0.09 per 100,000 kilometers. Dramatic reduction in the rate of accidents after doing something very, very simple. Here's what they did. They asked each driver to put a photograph of his family on the dashboard. That's it. Yep. They did that, and the rate of accidents actually dropped. Some of you, if you're not married, might argue that this will actually increase the rate of accidents, but, Yeah, but it actually worked. It actually worked. And I think, what's the message in it for all of us? I think it's pretty simple. As leaders, as people who try and get work done through other people, the mistake we can make is to constantly tell other people what to do. We tell them how to do it, but we don't tell them why they might want to do something. We don't give people a strong reason why something needs to be done. Okay? In the case of the Andhra bus drivers, give them a good reason. Tell them that there's a family waiting back home. Once the reason, once the why gets established, they'll find out how to do it. They'll find out what they need to do. Okay? And I think it's probably a good lesson for you to take back to your teams, to your organization, because when you go back, all of us fall into the trap of, saying we are in a hurry. So you see the guy and say, that's not what to do. I'll tell you what to do. Just do as I say. How many of you say that? Don't ask me too many questions. Just do as I tell you. You think you've been there, you've done that. These problems you've seen in your life before. So you try and tell that workman, that colleague, just do it. Just do it this way. Do what I tell you to do. Okay? Not a good idea. Give yourself a strong why. Let people understand why you want something to be done. And if you give them a strong why, you will find that those guys will find their own way to do it. They'll find out how to do it. They'll find out what to do. Probably true for all of us. If you want to achieve something in your life, very often you get busy with how do I do it? You get busy with what do I need to do to make that million? How do I make that million? Okay? But you forget, why do I want to make that million? If you give yourself a strong why, you'll discover that a lot more will happen than you might have otherwise thought possible. So that was lesson number 1. Start with why. Don't get tempted to go into how to do it, what to do. Don't get caught up in the hows and the whats. Start with why. Give people a really big why, and they'll figure out everything else. Lesson number 2, okay? And for this, I want to take you to a different place. Imagine now that there are 3 monkeys sitting on a tree above a pond. One monkey decides to jump into the pond. How many monkeys left on the tree? Sorry? None. 3. None is a good answer because, it's often believed that when one monkey jumps, all the others jump. But you know what? Very recently, the monkeys Googled, what do men do? And they found this is what men do, so this must be wrong. So monkeys have got smart, so they don't all jump now. But the answer is actually 3. Okay? And why? Because you only decided to jump, didn't actually jump. Yeah? And you're sitting there and saying, yeah, those monkeys, they are like that, Truth is, we are all like that. We are all constantly deciding that we'll do something. We're all planning to do something. We all have this grand plan of what we need to do next. We have a great idea of how to improve productivity. We have a fantastic plan on how to reduce cost. All of it is like that monkey deciding to jump into the pond. It hasn't actually jumped. Okay? And I think there's good advice in that old Nike ad which says, just do it. Yeah? Take action. Okay? Great leaders, good people, people who achieve things in their lives are people who have this ability to just go and do it. They're not constantly thinking of what to do. How many times has it happened to you that you find a colleague or somebody else at work or maybe another company which does something and it turns out to be a big success and you tell everybody, actually, it's my idea. I had this idea 3 months ago or I had it 2 years ago. That's not worth anything. Okay? Just because you had the idea doesn't mean anything. Most of us get caught up with the idea and then we are worried, will it work, not work? What if it fails? What does it take to work? Will I get support? Will I get the resources? So we are constantly thinking, but we're not actually doing anything. Okay? So become the kind of person who gets that bias for action and says, you know what, I just need to do it. Okay? And all those great ideas that you might have on productivity, they are worth nothing if you don't actually implement them. So as a person who wants to achieve more, wants to be the leader who, potentially the great leader that you are, get that bias for action. Become the kind of person who says, need to get on, need to do it. And unless you do it, you can go wrong, you can make mistakes, but unless you do it, you really won't make any progress. So that was lesson number 2. For lesson number 3, what I want to do is to take you far away. It's a story which is set in about 50, 60 years ago. And it's about a man called Charlie Plumb. Okay. Now, Charlie Plumb was a fighter in the US Navy, a pilot who flew the Phantom F-4 jet, did it with great success. He was in Vietnam, in North Vietnam in those days, and I think he did something like 74 sorties, went up, attacked enemy camps, came back, with just one more day to go, and then he would have gone back to the US. He was to make his 75th flight. Unfortunately for him, on that fateful day, his plane got shot and came crashing down. Luckily for him, he got a parachute and ejected out of the plane. Unluckily for him, as he landed, he got trapped. He got captured by the enemies, and he became a prisoner of war. And he stayed in a small cell for something like 6-7 years before he actually got back home. It's a great story of how someone did something great, got into trouble, and survived those 6 years in a jail. He then came back and, tells a lot of interesting stories of his time in Vietnam, how he survived those 6 years. But my favorite story from Charlie Plumb's life is a story which is set much later. And what happened apparently is he was having, several years later, he was having dinner in a restaurant when a man kept looking at him from another table. And you know how it happens sometimes? You're sitting in a restaurant and someone in the distance is actually, you can tell that the guy is looking at you. And Charlie Plumb looked at him but couldn't quite recognize him. and of course continue to eat. After a while, that man walked up to Charlie Plum and shook his hand and said, you're Charlie Plum. And he said, that's right. And he says, you flew the Phantom F-4 jet in Vietnam. And he says, that's right. And he says, you were on the ship Kitty Hawk. And he says, yeah, how do you know all that? And he says, yeah, and you got shot down and got captured. He says, blimey, how the hell do you know all of this? He says, well, I was the guy who packed your parachute. Okay? And Charlie Plum says, didn't know what to say. And he looked at him and said, so do you remember all the parachutes you packed? He says, no, not really. But when I see someone like you, I know that the parachute worked. Charlie Plum says he then went back home that night and he couldn't sleep. And he says, just imagine, he says, I was trying to remember the days when I might have been on the ship. Here was this guy. I was a pilot. I was this big guy. And that chap was just another cadet on the ship whose job was to pack parachutes. He said, that guy would have probably looked at me and said, good morning, sir, and I might not even have looked at him. The guy might have looked at me and admired me and wished I would respond to his message. I may have ignored him. And Charlie Plum said, I felt good that at least I got a chance now to thank the man for what he had done for me. But here's the question for all of you. Who's packing your parachute? Who's the guy who's helping you to look good? Okay. Very often it happens to us that we forget that we are so caught up in our success, in our lives, that we forget that there is someone else in the world who's actually made a difference to us, who's packed our parachute, who's made sure that we won't fail, who's there for us when we are in trouble. Okay. It could be a school teacher somewhere. It could be someone in the family. It could be a friend, a colleague, a mentor, a boss. But there is somebody out there who is doing his bit, who has done his bit to pack your parachute. And it's a good idea not to wait until much later. Pick up the phone and thank that person for what that person might have done for you. Become the kind of leader who recognizes the role that other people play in our lives. Most of us, as we become successful, we get so caught up in this idea that I'm good and therefore I'm successful. Forget it. Try and remember who are the people who helped you to become good. Who are the people who've taught you those lessons? Who are the people you can count on? And I think, not all of us will later have a chance to thank them perhaps, and you might have that regret that you didn't get a chance to thank them. So good idea perhaps for you to become the kind of person who recognizes these other people. Okay? It could be a foreman on the shop floor. It could be anybody, but there are people who do their bit to make us look good. Good idea to thank them. And while you're at it, maybe there's another question you've got to ask yourself, which is this: whose parachute are you packing? Okay? We all like this idea that other people should help us. We all like it that somebody else is there who we can count on when we are in trouble. But who's counting on you? Who are you helping to ensure that they can do well in their lives? Okay? And I think if nothing else, it's a good idea to have a few names on your list. People who pack your parachute and people whose parachute you are packing. Okay? Become that kind of person who's not so caught up in his own success, in his own world, in his own achievements. Become the kind of person who's as worried about helping other people to succeed. If you can help enough other people to succeed, you will find that they will help you to achieve a lot more than you might have ever thought possible. Okay? So that was lesson number 3. And for the last one, lesson number 4, okay, I have a question for you. What do you do when you see a red light at the traffic signal? Even in Chennai. What do you do? Of course, everybody stops, right? All of us stop. Right? But let me ask you a question. Do you stop every time? No. Yeah, so what happens sometimes? Most of us would answer it like this: of course I stop when I see a red light, because that's what you do. But what if it's at 2 a.m. when there's no traffic? Then we go through. Sometimes we go through a red light because the guy in front of us is going through it. Sometimes we say, actually, I went through because the guy behind me was honking, so I went through it. And of course, there are times when, what if there's an emergency? Imagine someone is, critical, dying and in the car, and you need to take him to a hospital. What do? You jump the red light so that he doesn't die at the hospital, dies at the traffic signal. Yeah? So I think there's good advice, and it is this, that, if you see a red light, stop. Always stop. Okay? And I think you might wonder, what's traffic lights and driving habits got to do with being a good leader? But I think there's a very critical message that I want to share with you over here, which is this. Most of us tend to think that it's all right. Okay? We know that if you see a red light, you're supposed to stop. We know that if you jump a red light, you're doing the wrong thing. And yet, you create situations, or you allow situations to get the better of what you know. So if it's late in the night, it's okay to jump a red light. If the guy in front of me is doing it, it's all right. If there is no traffic police, it's all right to do it. Yeah? And I'm saying this because, I've often wondered, you often hear of people from the corporate world suddenly being in trouble. Someone I've admired in my life, went on to become the first global head of perhaps the world's largest consulting business. He's in jail, arrested for fraud. Okay? Look at the number of corporates who find themselves in jail, who do the wrong thing. You can become the chairman and managing director of a bank in this country and find yourself in jail for doing the wrong thing. And I've often wondered, why is it that these guys do such things that land themselves in trouble? Okay? None of them, I'm sure, went to school and college to go to jail. None of them grew their careers in reputed banks, in consulting businesses, in large organizations. They didn't do that to go to jail. What happened? Why do things go wrong? And I think the answer lies in this. Okay? What happens to us is, we think it's all right. If I asked you the question today that, would you cheat your company of money? If you found that, if there was company money and you had access to it, would you steal a couple of crores? Your answer probably, of course not. I would never do it. That's what you would answer. But your answer is very much like the answer to your question, would you jump a red light? What happens if the guy in front of you is stealing money? What happens if the guy behind you is honking and saying, you also take some money? What happens if the traffic cop is not looking, if there's no one looking at the money and you have a chance to kind of pick it up? What happens if it's 2 a.m. in the night and you have a chance to take the money? Right? So what really happens is this. I think it's a good lesson to remember that it's easier to hold on to your principles 100% of the time than it is to hold on to it 95% of the time. Most of us think it's easier to say that I will do it 95% of the time. 100% very difficult, right? I'm on a diet. Do you eat sweets? No, I don't. Well, most of the time. What happens is the minute that 100 becomes 95, you have no control. 95 will very soon become 90. 90 will become 80. 80 will become 70. 70 will become 60. And before you know it, you're in trouble. Okay? So I think it's a good lesson to remember that never mind what you do in your life, okay, if there are values that you hold dear, hold on to them. Don't allow situations to get the better of you. Don't think that because of where I was, it's all right to break the rule. It is never all right to break the rule. If you see a traffic light which is red, never mind what time of the day it is, just tell yourself, I need to wait. Because if you tell yourself that, you will also remind yourself that if it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to steal at any time. Okay? If it's wrong to tell lies, it's wrong to tell lies at any time. If it's wrong to bribe, it's wrong to bribe at any time. Okay? Circumstances can change, but the value should remain. So I think I just say this, value those values. Ensure that you remain honest to yourself. At the end of the day, it's not about getting caught or not getting caught. It's not about saying, will the police get you or not get you? It's about asking yourself the question, can I look at myself in the mirror and look into my own eyes without feeling ashamed of what I'm doing? Okay. And I think all of you will go on to do many things in your lives. You'll run large businesses. I'm hoping you'll be successful. I'm hoping you'll go on to lead, big teams. But I think it's good to remember nothing is worth doing if it's not the right thing to do. So those really are the 4 messages that I wanted to kind of share with you. The first one, give yourself a strong why. Start with a why. Get that bias for action. Don't be like the monkey constantly deciding to jump into the water. Make that leap. Take that jump. Remember the parachute, okay? And don't forget to thank the person who's packing your parachute. Equally, ask yourself the question, whose parachute are you packing? And finally, when you see a red light, starting from today, stop at the red light. Always stop at that red light. So those really are the 4 key messages that I want to leave you with. I'm hoping, like I said, one of these at least will stick in your head and will tell you, yup, this makes sense for me. And I'm hoping that, that little switch gets turned on and it turns you on to deliver terrific performances, greater productivity, greater output, and really, it helps you to unleash the leader who's inside you and become the kind of person that you were meant to be. I just want to end with one last line, which is a quote actually from a man, from Michelangelo. And Michelangelo said, the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it. Okay. So I think it's a good message to take away. Aim high, dream big dreams. Try and set yourself impossible targets. Try and tell yourself, you know what, I'm going to do something which no one has done before. And you'll be surprised with what you can achieve. Good luck. Enjoy the rest of the National Productivity Summit. Thank you very much for being a patient audience.
For a wonderful way to start our Productivity Summit. At the end of the day, I think it's important for us to recognize that we have aiming low and achieving low is the biggest danger as individuals, as corporations, as country, what we can do to ourselves in terms of as an injustice. So when we see the reports like McKinsey report of labor productivity 1:100, I'm certainly reminded that probably we are too soon to recognize that we are achieving our objective. Probably we need to raise the bar, aim higher. Thank you, Prakash. It was really, really an excellent presentation. I must say that. Great way to start.